People, something very special is currently happening within the gaming space at the moment, where people are coming together and actually agreeing on something for a change. A space where usually people are disagreeing on things like impressions on a game or which platform is the best to use. It's a once in a blue moon moment where everybody is coming together in order to fight for something that's actually beneficial to the gaming industry. I think the last time we saw something like this happen was when everybody was required to use a PSN in order to log into Helldivers 2, which meant that the game was locked out of basically 100 different countries, and people basically review bombed that game in order to ensure that Sony reverted that change. And now the topic that everybody is discussing right now and is currently dominating the gaming space, where everybody is shouting about it from the rooftops practically, is a little movement called Stop Killing Games. In what can only be described as the biggest comeback of the century, this movement is currently sitting at around 800,000 signatures as of recording, almost 80% of the way towards its 1 million signature goal. And this is in stark contrast to what it was just even a week back, when it was only half of that at 400,000, and the future for the movement looked a little grim. But thanks to a ton of some of the biggest content creators in the gaming space out there talking about this topic, people have been rallying together in order to make it their mission to make sure that this movement succeeds. I think some of the biggest videos I've seen are from people like Moist Critical, who I believe was one of the first big content creators to jump on this and speak out about this movement, with the rest of videos being sort of reactions to his and other content creators' videos. You had people like PewDiePie, some common gamers, and even Jacksepticeye throwing their hat into the ring in order to contribute and make sure that this actually ends up becoming a reality. But why are people fighting so desperately to make sure that this movement actually passes? Well, I think it's a combination of multiple factors. I think one of the first reasons is that people are slowly growing tired of the current state of gaming at the moment. It feels like everything is becoming more expensive and gamers are owning less as a result. Like companies saying that they can shut down a game at any point and remove your access to it, in some cases for no reason whatsoever. Others saying that they can remove your access to a console when you're trying to tamper it, you know, hardware that you bought and you should own as a result. And don't even get me started on all these other technical fiascos that have been going on at the moment, where you're technically buying a license and not the actual video game, and that's only worsened as a result of, you know, digital distribution being the primary form of purchases that most people use as opposed to physical copies. And of course subscriptions like Xbox Games Pass, where you're not really owning the game but rather renting it out so long as you continue to pay the monthly fee, which at this point is only continuing to get more and more expensive. But I think the most important factor is the fact that this is just a good movement to actually support. There's nothing polarizing about Stop Killing Games. It's a good movement that stands on the side of consumers and players in a constantly changing space that most of the world and people in governmental positions aren't really all that well versed about and aren't really doing a good job trying to keep up with. But what exactly is Stop Killing Games asking for? Well, to the best of my ability, I would say that Stop Killing Games is basically fighting for basic consumer rights, and more than that, fighting for game preservation. When a developer or publisher decides that they will be ending support for a game, whether because it didn't do quite so well, or perhaps they're moving on to bigger, more profitable projects, or for some other reason, they're basically saying, don't destroy the game and leave it in an unplayable state for the people that bought the game, but rather ensure that you have an end of life or sunset plan for those games. Because when you buy something, you should be able to keep it, right? If you bought a t-shirt, you should still be able to keep the t-shirt even if the brand decides that they're no longer manufacturing it anymore. They can't just come to your house and take it away from you. And at its most layman's terms, that's basically what Stop Killing Games is. But to ensure that I have the most faithful representation of what this initiative is actually trying to achieve, I'm going to read off what it actually says on its website. So basically, Stop Killing Games is a consumer movement started to challenge the legality of publishers destroying video games they have sold to customers. And I'm just going to leave it at that. The most bread and butter cookie cutter explanation possible, because there's a lot of fog in the air because of, you know, extra factors that people have been trying to add into the mix, which is only, you know, harming the movement. It's a movement that started to make the rounds around 2024 and has been shaped to what it is today, mainly thanks to the works of a channel named Accursed Farms, which is owned by Ross Scott, who's dedicated a lot of his time to make sure that this is in the best possible state it can be to to represent this issue and hopefully resolve it. And there are two things that Stop Killing Games is currently trying to push in order to ensure that the conversation for preservation of games actually gets started. Now, the first one is a UK petition, and despite initial sentiments being that this is probably one of the least likely to succeed, it is currently sitting at 95,000 signatures out of 100,000. It is so close, you could practically taste it. And what this initiative is basically trying to do is the government should update consumer law to prohibit publishers from disabling video games and related game assets features they have already sold without recourse for customers to retain or repair them. We seek this as a statutory consumer right. Now, I myself have signed the UK petition because that's as much as I can contribute to Stop Killing Games. And I say that because there's a bit of a misconception going online surrounding the bigger initiative, which is the EU petition. Some people have been going online to say if you're in the UK, you should sign the EU petition. But to that I say, if you're in this country, you're not eligible to sign this initiative. And that's because the UK is not part of the European Union. We sort of left it back in 2020 because of a whole thing called Brexit. A very polarizing topic. Whether or not it was actually good for the country, depends on who you ask. But as it stands, if you're in the UK, you cannot sign the EU petition, but you can sign the UK one, which is very close to succeeding. But the biggest tool in Stop Killing Games' arsenal at the moment is the European Citizens Initiative. And what this basically is that when you reach 1 million signatures, you will be able to basically get the conversation started, being able to present the arguments placed here in front of the European Commission. It's not a petition, but the start of something much bigger. Because when Europe makes a change on a particular practice, there's a high likelihood that that is then implemented across the globe to other regions because of how big of a market Europe is. I mean, take Apple for instance. When it comes to their latest iPhone models, they were required to swap from their little lightning cables to USB-C, which is much more commonly used. You have the EU to thank for that. And something a bit more gaming related, which I think Ross himself references, is when Valve was sued by the people of Australia for having misleading refund policies, which then had a major impact on refunds going forward for services like Steam for everybody across the globe. I mean, here at the Citizens Initiative, within 1 month, you will meet with representatives of the Commission so you can explain the issues raised in your initiative in detail. Within 3 months, you will have the opportunity to present your initiative at a public hearing at the European Parliament. And then within 6 months, the Commission will spell out what action, if any, it will propose in response to your initiative. And it's well on its way there with more than 800,000 signatures, a much better position than it was a few weeks back. But there's a reason why it was like that and why some of the top creators decided to chip in order to elevate this movement and try to get it in front of as many people as possible, because they were trying to combat misinformation surrounding the initiative. It's hard not to talk about Stop Killing Games without bringing up Pirate Software. He's sort of become synonymous with the movement, whether or not they like it or not. And despite the fact that there's evidence showing that his comments harmed the movement itself and killed its momentums a few months back, there's a lot of people who probably would never have heard about this if not for the controversy. There's been a sort of tug-of-war conflict between the people who are supporting this and the one-man army that is Pirate Software. And people aren't mad at him because he's against Stop Killing Games. I mean, it's a free country. If you don't like Stop Killing Games, you're well within your rights. But people were mad at him because he painted a false narrative and misrepresented what Stop Killing Games was trying to achieve. Most people are referencing the 2 videos that he posted on the subject where he broke down the movement and explained why he was against it. I watched the 2 videos, right? And for my best understanding, despite the fact that Stop Killing Games is asking for developers and publishers to create a sunset plans for games they decide to end support for, Pirate Software is suggesting that the initiative is asking for games to be remade from the ground up, like multiplayer genres like MOBAs needing to be remade in order to facilitate a single player experience, even though that's not what it's asking for, or suggesting that games need to run servers indefinitely, which again is clearly stated that that's not what they're demanding, or even saying that the initiative is trying to kill live service games, when it's trying to do the opposite. It's trying to make sure that games aren't being killed, that they aren't being destroyed. And when people started coming after him about this, instead of admitting fault, he instead just doubled down. It's not my problem, it's just all of you who did not properly understand my words or properly read the initiative. You're just taking your impressions from what everybody else is saying online. It's such a weird situation overall. I mean, even when Moist Critical apparently tried to, get involved and try to speak with Pirate Software, nothing really got resolved because because, you know, there was a bit of an impasse between the two parties. And I think at this point, it's very clear that like neither side wants anything to do with each other anymore and are just going their separate ways, which I think is probably the most productive and reasonable outcome we can get. It's not really worth dwelling on this point because it isn't a hit campaign against pirate software, even if some people probably did join in order to, you know, get back at him. But it's mainly should be, you know, focusing on the fact that this is a positive movement preserving games. But the main thing I wanted to highlight was the fact that so much of the community actually came together in order to try and push something that they really truly believed was a positive thing. And in fact that so many content creators now are sort of trying to use their influence in order to try and right the ship, if you will, clear the fog in the air and focus on what actually matters, which is game preservation. Because games like music and films are reflections of, you know, the times that they were made in. And I think it's really important for future generations to look back on these games and see how far we've come. But yeah, that was Stop Killing Games. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't want to say that we should call this a victory just yet, because again, it still has a long way to go before reaching the 1 million signature milestone. But even if it doesn't succeed, I think it's a great thing that this has raised so much awareness on the issue itself, and it has actually gotten people to discuss, you know, is the current state of the gaming industry actually beneficial for consumers? Should I actually own the games that I buy? I think only time will tell whether or not this was actually worth it in the end, or whether or not it just ended up being a massive waste of time and headache for all parties involved. Again, I still think that this is a really important thing, and I hope it does pass. And more than that, I hope that when it gets in front of the European Commission, it actually does pass into law and actually start to shift the industry in the right direction, because I feel like it's kind of regressed over the past couple of years. But if there's anything to take away from this, I think it's the fact that you shouldn't believe everything you read online, and more than that, you shouldn't believe everything you hear online on people, you know, you admire or look up to, because everybody can make mistakes. And I imagine there's still a lot of people who still have a false impression of what Stop Killing Games is about. And I think that's just a harsh reality a lot of us will need to accept. But I think we should just focus on what we can do now, which is spreading the word and trying to make sure that as many people are aware about what Stop Killing Games actually is about. But yeah, I mean, that's everything for me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to boot up the North Star client to play Timefall 2. See ya.